Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to ACMi's coverage of the reenactment of the Battle of Menotomy. I am James Milan, ACMi's communications manager and play-by-play for today. And I am joined, importantly, by Michael Ruderman. Michael is a local historian and with a specific and particular and deep interest in the events here in Arlington that were part of these first moments of the revolution. So, Michael, thanks for being here. Really glad to have you.
Thank you, James. It's a great day, and we're excited. We're anticipating seeing a lot of action out on Massachusetts Avenue, or 250 years ago, as it would have been known, the Concord Road, the Great Road, Battle Road today.
Why don't you give us a little context, Michael, for things that have happened before what we'll be seeing today?
Sure. For many years, basically, the Crown had been letting the colonies take care of themselves for a long period of time. But for the last several years, His Majesty's government, with huge war debts, have been trying to extract ever-increasing amounts of revenue from the American colonies, and particularly here in Massachusetts. And with all the ships coming in and out of Boston, with all the goods that are landed here, the royal government has been trying to collect some tax. And it was newly imposed about 8 years before this, before the sites we're seeing today, and the colonists have been fighting it ever since. And that fight led to Massachusetts losing its own local government, the right to self-govern. The king sent a royal governor, a military general, Thomas Gage. We are literally living under one-person rule here in Massachusetts. And Gage, he has orders, while trying to keep things quiet here in His Majesty's colony, he is trying to cut the legs out of any efforts to fight back. They know that there's rebellious spirits in the land, and they're doing everything they can to cut that off.
All right, so that sets the table for what we're seeing today. Of course, the events, even though today is April 20th here, and that's when we're celebrating this, we're really talking about the battle that's being reenacted here, having happened on that first day, on April 19th, right?
Right, and we're talking about the afternoon of the 19th, which was a day very similar to today, 250 years ago and a day ago, at the same time that troops were moving in all different directions. Here on the afternoon of the 19th, the royal troops have been in retreat. They were beaten up badly in Lexington. They had to call for reinforcements literally to rescue them. But now they're reinforced, and since that reinforcement, about 2:30 in the afternoon, they've been coming back from Lexington. It's no longer a run out to the countryside, quick and light mission to find cannons, find gunpowder, maybe even capture John Hancock and Sam Adams, which the Crown has reports of. They're the ringleaders. By this point in the afternoon, the royal troops are just trying to get home without any more casualties. And it's going very badly for them. They are facing colonial resistance on all sides. And we're recreating some of that today. We have colonial units on the avenue, on Battle Road, both ahead of the royal troops and behind them, as they did in fact fight that day. And we'll have staged episodes along the line of march at the same time. The fighting stretched all the way from about the Lexington town line and the foot of the rocks all the way to the what's today the town line into Cambridge at Alewife. The royal troops had to march that entire distance under what their commanders described as unceasing circle of fire. Not 5 minutes went by without them taking shots from somewhere. They couldn't see where. And it is harder and harder for the officers to maintain any kind of discipline. The fighting is going house to house because the royal troops now have orders. Break into every house that you see, find anybody who's still there, anybody who hasn't fled to safety, they're going to presume is a combatant, and they have orders to kill.
A lot of the movement we're seeing from the British soldiers here looks very regimented.
We have some of their actual manuals of arms from the time, and we know what their orders would have been, that to close up ranks, to fill in behind the front rank. First rank kneels, second rank stands, first rank on knees shoots, second rank falls into firing position. It was deadly, and it could mow down an army, except the Colonials aren't fighting like an army. They're fighting a series of dozens of these little pitched skirmishes, and the Royal troops have no training for this. They have nothing that has prepared them for what they said, shooting at wretches who would not come out and show themselves. So it explains some of the reports of the savagery and the ferocity of the fighting.
How did the colonists, because there was this huge response to, as soon as word got out that the British were on their way to Concord, people, colonists Minutemen came from a number of surrounding communities, no?
Yes, they did.
How apprised were they of this as a possibility, or was this really a spontaneous reaction, or what?
Part was spontaneous, part was planned well in advance. Ever since the preceding fall, when the government in exile, you might say, in Massachusetts, the provincial legislature had ordered towns all throughout eastern Massachusetts to select their best men from their militia. The militia was the traditional form of military service. Everybody mustered 2 or 4 times a year. No, you're going to select your very best men, maybe a quarter of them, youngest, strongest, fittest, and train them regularly. Have them ready to turn out in what was called fast order, as little as 30 minutes notice. And history has nicknamed them the Minutemen.
It looks like here we see the Colonials who are following. As you said, the British, the retreating British were in a bit of a pickle, so to speak, because they were being pursued as well as meeting opposition with every new 10 yards of ground they covered.
They were. The commander of the afternoon engagements on the Royal side, Lord Percy, probably His Majesty's best and most professional and experienced soldier in North America, said that he couldn't believe the level of organization that the Colonials displayed here. Looks like somebody had a misfire there a few seconds ago. You've got to get rid of the gunpowder in your musket immediately if that happens, because you could light it off with the next round, and you could literally blow up the musket in your hands if you don't discharge it. The local Minutemen, bolstered by the militia and bolstered by the male residents who were not bound to military service. The people who were simply on what they called the alarm list, your very last resort. Everybody is pouring in towards the sound of the battle, and they're coming in companies just as fast as they can gather up, each in their own individual towns, and make the hike towards where the battle is unfolding. All of the companies that were at North Bridge in Concord are behind the Royal troops. That's the Lexington men. They never gave up the fight. I've got to think that Captain Parker was just enraged that they shot at his men on his town green, because he follows them all day long throughout all the sites that the National Park has done such a great job of interpreting. Merriam's Corner, Parker's Revenge, all these places where you can walk in the footsteps of the battle, as these people are doing here today, except it wasn't all preserved as a national park. It was modernized with every passing month and year up to the present. So we're asking you today to use some imagination. It did happen here. It did happen on our avenue through the middle of this village. It didn't happen with all these buildings around.
Didn't happen on concrete.
No, but it happened.
The Battle of Menotomy, and this battle as the British troops moved through this part of the road, was one in which you cited that thousands of people on both sides, thousands of combatants on both sides were involved. Remind us of what those numbers are again?
It's staggering to think that so many people converged on the same place. Lexington Green, I think the number that's become locked into history is 77 men, Captain Parker and his command, maybe 400 at Concord Bridge. By the time the battle rolls down the Concord Road to this point, the village of Menotomy, there are almost 4,000 Colonial soldiers involved. They've been streaming in, and they've come from as far as Roxbury, Dedham, Needham. On the North Shore, the Essex men from Lynn and Salem, which is today's towns of Danvers, Peabody as well. Watertown was in the fight early because they had such a short distance to come, as well as the company from Medford. Beverly came down from the coast. We've got numbers on this because almost of an accident of history. The provincial legislature asked the different commanders in these towns that responded, if you want to get paid for your Minutemen's service that day, give us a list of the men who answered the muster. And they did. And would you believe that a lot of these mundane little pay receipts still are in existence? Massachusetts State Archives has them. And a historian by the name of F.W. Coburn, back I think in 1912, did the laborious work of going through them and figuring out the handwriting and counting up the names. And he comes up with a total of over 3,800 Colonials who submitted pay vouchers for service that day. So from the most mundane of historical receipts, we can say that with very good confidence, there were at least 4,000 Colonial soldiers in Menotomy that day. Among the ones that didn't put in for pay, Menotomy's own. Or they did put in for pay and that receipt was lost, can't find it. But I can't imagine that they didn't turn out. Everything happened through Menotomy in the morning, everything happened through Menotomy in the afternoon. Paul Revere rode right by the front door of Benjamin Locke. Locke was the captain of the Menotomy Minutemen. All the historians know that Revere was making stops along the way. We don't have an itinerary. They didn't keep notes like that. It would have been fatal to anyone captured with notes like that. But we know that Revere was making stops along the way. When he rides by the captain of a minute company, he had to have stopped there. So the Menotomy Minutemen probably got the word at midnight, which was 3 hours before the first troops marched through Menotomy on their way to Lexington and Concord.
So 4,000, let us call them Minutemen. As you said, that was a name given to them by history. But 4,000 Colonial troops, and up against what numbers in the retreating, excuse me.
Here's where the numbers vary because we don't have the same records, but we know the number of Royal regiments. We know which ones were engaged, and we have through other sources their average complement at full strength. So making some surmises about company numbers and strength, we can probably say perhaps 1,800 Royal troops in all.
So that is, by far the largest number of people engaged in these first few days.
Absolutely.
And yet, it is almost wholly unknown, as I know you have written about in various formats, almost wholly unknown, this Battle of Menotomy outside of, the confines of Arlington or this area.
And there are good reasons for that. One is that Menotomy has grown and been developed, and it's a totally modern landscape when you look at what we're seeing here. Yep, that's the 10th Regiment. They've got the yellow facings, the yellow trims on their uniforms. The musicians wore yellow solely. That was their custom, and it also let you know who wasn't about to shoot you.
Right. So the yellow in this case was a non-combatant kind of signal.
Right,
as well.
except cannonballs wouldn't distinguish. If the Americans had cannon, they did not. The Royal troops did. Imagine that. They needed cannon to keep the road clear behind and in front of them against farmers. But these were farmers with a passion, they were farmers with training, and they were farmers who were fighting for their neighbors and kin by this point. Rick Atkinson, who is a Pulitzer Prize winning author, New York Times bestseller, list for his first in a trilogy, The British Are Coming. And then the second one in the trilogy is about to come out in a few days now, The Fate of the Day. He said that from the first shedding of blood, colonials were fighting both for the lofty ideals that we've memorialized in history of freedom and independence. They were also fighting for their brothers and their cousins and their in-laws and the neighbor who was shot through the chest on Lexington Green and whose blood splattered the rest of the company around him. They're fighting for people that they can name, people whose bodies they've carried back home this morning to their own doorsteps, dead in their arms. This is as personal as a combat has ever become.
All right, and you could see in the scene just before there the brand new AHS high school logo there or sign, and so the action now is passing by the high school and moving into the second phase, or we will be in short order moving into the actual battle in front of the Jason Russell House. But of course,
we're looking to pick up on some of the flanking actions that we know were executed during the day. This is, first of all, it's significant in that it's saying that the strategy has changed. The original object was to get to Concord as fast as they could. Now it's a battle to survive. And the commanders have set out some of the troops outside of the van, the main company, and they are trekking over the fields, the stone walls. They are perhaps 75, 80, maybe even 100 yards outside of the Great Road, and they are out there in order to find where the fire is coming from and to suppress it. And if that means breaking into a house and killing everyone they find, that's what they're doing. So it's a particularly vicious and bloody strategy, but the Royal troops they're at the point of survival here. They are fighting for their lives to get home. They are faced with armed opposition to the front, to the rear, and coming at them from places unknown.
Yeah, and I want to just follow up on that a little bit. We see a depiction of a fallen Royals there. They also had a lot of wounded, right? At this point, they're getting back from confrontations all along miles and miles of this road now.
Right, about this time of the afternoon, they're probably trying to bring along 150 wounded of their own. And we have, truly heartbreaking stories of the worst of the wounded being loaded into carts or carried on the gun carriage. The Royals were marching with 2 cannons at this point, and they put some of the wounded on the gun carriage. But if the opposition from the Colonials grew too hot, they had to drag those cannon up to the head of the line, and the wounded would fall off, and some of them were shot dead as they fell there. They couldn't run away. It's a bloody situation. but it's not memorialized as a national park, and it's in a village whose name isn't a current one on the map. And for a lot of reasons, the rest of the story of what happened in the weeks and the months following this, with the siege of Boston and the heroic exploits of this new American army that the Continental Congress had called down to Virginia for a Virginian to lead, besieging His Majesty's troops in Boston and successfully driving them out. That's the big story worldwide, that the Royal troops have abandoned New England when they sail out in March of '76. That's what the world is focused on. Right now, it's an internal conflict between some of His Majesty's subjects who refuse to accede to royal rule, and an increasingly harder military force that is trying to exert that royal force will and make them obey law.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what you've just said is a really good reminder of how history unfolds, right? And history is, in the end, kind of registered, and that is we invest much in the significance of these first days and these first battles of the Revolution, but that's only because of everything that happened thereafter.
And the writing of history that has written this episode into every American history text really got going in earnest about a generation or two generations later, as America approached the 50th anniversary of the battle. And certainly by the centennial, there were poems and tributes and statues and presidential visits to Lexington and Concord, which were there in Lexington and Concord. And you could see the sites and you could visit the actual battlegrounds and the graves of the dead. There were colonials and royal soldiers buried in Menotomy in unmarked graves. You couldn't leave a body to decompose. It was a health hazard. They were buried almost within hours in the clothes that they were wearing. So history moved on, great events followed, and this became an episode sort of appended onto the main action of the morning, but certainly worthy of examination in itself. we're getting feed now as the Colonials took cover behind stone walls and then fell back and fired again and fell back some more. It looks like they're charging down the road and taking aim on Jason Russell's farmhouse. And I urge you, if you ever want to see living history truly brought to life, go over there sometime and ask the guides to point out the evidence that still remains of the fight inside Jason Russell's house. That house was shot up from every direction, from outside, from within. The more and more musket ball strikes are being revealed every time the Arlington Historical Society, which owns it and administers it, every time they look more closely, they find more evidence of hell that happened inside those walls. Shots coming in from the windows, shots coming in from the gardens outside. You can almost say that only 12 people, only 12 Colonials and a couple of Royal troops were killed. That's sort of amazing when you read the stories of just how much fighting there was. It was a bloody mess. There is no soft pedaling. It horrified people.
And the depiction that we're seeing today, right now, is on our screens of this, brutal and bloody confrontation is all outside because simply, we're not going to be moving to the inside. But as you said, and in a timely fashion as well, because the Jason Russell House has just been opened for the season for folks to come in and tour. But as you said, a lot happened that can't be shown in this particular reenactment, and adds to the intensity.
That's right. That's right. We're watching it as we're describing it here. We have many eyewitness accounts that the fight was on Jason Russell's yard, orchard, and in his house, and it's a centerpiece of the reenactment every year that, to the extent we can, we portray what happened on that ground.
And you can see that the ground is now being strewn with fallen bodies.
And that's Jim McLean serving admirably in the role of Jason Russell this year. As his friends and neighbors long said afterwards, he was killed, bayoneted on his very doorstep. Now, is that one of the stories in history that's just too good to prove? Maybe. But that's the way they told it. And that's the way it came down, and that's the way the public read about it immediately and for centuries after. Recently, the Arlington Historical Society engaged a firearms and antique weapons expert, Joel Bohe, to do a study inside the house. You may have seen him on Antiques Roadshow as the resident expert on weapons and militaria.
Is that right?
And he did an examination of the interior of the house, basically as if it had been a crime scene. And using the evidence that had been covered over for decades and decades in the Russell family's continuing life in that house for 3 more generations. The evidence was there, and the evidence is still visible and apparent, and it's sufficient to backtrack the paths that the actual musket balls took. And what he did was he did a 3-dimensional digital construction of the house, and he can trace where the shots were coming from, as well as the shots that were fired from inside the house. And you folks who have the experience of watching this happen live as it's coming down the road past you, and the noise that those muskets make, black powder, firing off. Imagine being in your kitchen when muskets are going off, because we know they did. We know they were shooting and fighting in there, as well as brutal swinging of muskets as clubs, stabbing with the bayonets.
Sorry to interrupt. We mentioned flanking maneuvers earlier, and I just noticed that the British were also coming from the backside of the Jason Russell House. That perhaps that's an example of the flanking that you were talking about. The fact that the British troops were the main body of them were coming down the road, but then, as you have already noted, on both sides there were these flanking troops.
There were, and it was the one piece of professional military's tactics that it eluded the Colonials. They had never had to do a road battle. They hadn't trained for that. The Royal troops did have orders for how to fight their way through hostile territory, and that's what they were doing. And if one of these units that was traveling at 75 or 100 yards outside of the main road, if they came across someone who looked like a combatant, as they said, that person had to be put to death. And Jason
back
Russell,
turned or doesn't matter, right? I mean,
they're fighting a war. No, it doesn't matter. No, and certainly by this time, the Colonials have broken with what the Royal troops would have said were all
the rules of
engagement completely. They wouldn't line up. They wouldn't fire from units. They wouldn't show themselves. And poor Jason Russell and the men from Essex, Lynn, the Danvers men who were with us today, companies from the North Shore, helping us out in this depiction. They were surrounded. They literally did not see it coming, and as fast as they could, they tried to run to the house. Some of them made it. Some of them ran down into the basement and survived by turning their muskets around as fast as they could and aiming them back up the stairs and firing at the Royal troops from inside the basement up the stairs. We know a couple of Royal troops died right there at the head of the stairs. The rest of the men that didn't make it down into the basement, they were slaughtered inside the house.
We are, as we look at the scenes from the street, we've moved on from that central bloody battle.
That's right.
In front of the Jason Russell House. Tell us about what happens hereafter on that day, whether we're able to see it or not. What happens from here?
We can't see it. You and I, we are hearing it right now. We're sitting here on the stage of the auditorium in Town Hall, and the doors are open to Battle Road, and we're hearing the reports of the musket fire loudly and echoing through this room. Now, what happens at the end of this day is that the Royal troops continue to fight for their survival from Alewife Brook into right down Mass Ave into North Cambridge. Lord Percy, who is in command of this 1,800 man combined battalion, he gets word that the route ahead of him is likely to be another ambush. They marched through what we would call today Harvard Square in the morning, and they were able to do that because the Colonials, they had torn up the planks of the bridge over the Charles River from the Brighton side. It was called the Brighton Bridge, in fact, back then. They had torn up the planks, but they had left them by the side of the bridge. So Percy's men, put them back. No, this time Percy has information that they've not only torn up the bridge and cast the planks into the water, permanently taking the bridge out of action, but that the minute companies who are in Old Cambridge, that would be today's Harvard Square, they're waiting for them on the banks of the Charles. So he takes his company, Percy does, and by about, if you know North Cambridge, Watson's Corner, it's where Beach Street is today. And they go from Mass Ave to Beach Street on a left turn and then a right turn on Somerville Ave. And Somerville Ave is going to take them through Somerville, what we call Somerville today. It was Charlestown back then. It was Charlestown Avenue, and it takes them all the way to the foot of Charlestown Heights, which is surmounted by the hills that become famous very soon after. Reed's Hill, Bunker Hill, these hills that look down upon Boston Harbor. They get there long after dark. They've been on the march for almost 24 hours by the time they get there. And they fall on the ground. They don't even build themselves shelter for the night. They collapse, but finally they're safe again. They're on the Charlestown coastline, where any approaching force would not only have to contend with them, but would have to answer to the guns of the battleships in the harbor, because the Royal Navy can reach them and protect them there. So they finally get back to safety. The colonial forces, though, they do something extraordinary. They didn't go home. Nobody set off that day thinking, we're going to fight a war, we're going to start a revolution. But they don't go home. They camp out on these same heights that circle Boston Harbor, and they blockade Boston. Boston at this time is connected to the ground, to the land, only by this thin little neck of land. Mm-hmm. And the Colonials effectively seal off Boston, and it's a standoff.
And that will take us to the end of our presentation today. He is Michael Ruderman. The guy knows just a little bit about what he's talking about. We really appreciate
Thank you
taking the time to kind of illuminate and elucidate what we've been watching for the last
It's
while.
a pleasure. And for the kids who'd like to be historians, I'll tell you, it's a fascinating story, and you can find it. You can find so many sources today online. All you need to do is have some curiosity and read. That's all it takes.
All right. Well, we want to thank Michael again. We also want to thank Leader Bank, who helped fund this entire series of events. We definitely want to thank our ACMi colleagues who have been strewn up and down Mass Ave to present you with all of the images that you've seen today. And believe me, they have been working very hard to make that happen. So a very successful reenactment day. Nice job with the weather, whoever was in charge of that.
Thank you to you folks for turning out today. It was a great crowd outside.
Great crowd outside, and thank you to you who are tuning in from further away. On behalf of Michael Ruderman, on behalf of the entire ACMi crew, I am James Milan. This has been the presentation of the reenactment of the Battle of Menotomy. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Three cheers for Captain Rock! Hip hip hip! Huzzah! Hip hip hip! Huzzah! Hip hip hip! Huzzah! Gentlemen, well done, well fought. To the front! March!
ACMi productions are only made possible with your support. Visit patreon.com/ACMi to learn how you can help.